Imagine standing at the edge of a vast ice sheet stretching beyond the horizon. The air burns your lungs with each breath, a reminder that you exist in a world teetering on the edge of survival. This is not some distant sci-fi scenario, but our planet just 12,800 years ago. The ground beneath your feet vibrates with a subtle tremor. The ice sheet that has dominated the northern hemisphere for tens of thousands of years is retreating. Animals long adapted to the cold begin their migration northward. The world is warming. Humans are thriving. And then, without warning, everything changes. Within a span of mere decades, perhaps even years, global temperatures plummet. The warming trend that promised a gentler world abruptly reverses. Ice advances again. Forests die. Megafauna vanish. The northern hemisphere is thrust back into a deep freeze. Scientists call this period the Younger Dryas, named after a small Arctic alpine flower that suddenly reappeared in European pollen samples. It was a climate reversal so severe and unexpected that it defies simple explanation, lasting for nearly 1,300 years. But tonight, we aren't focusing on what caused this catastrophic cold snap. Instead, we're examining something even more extraordinary: the humans who survived it, and how they did so with innovations we're only beginning to understand. Picture entire communities watching as their hunting territories transformed before their eyes. Plants they relied on vanished. Animals they tracked for generations disappeared. Water sources dried up or froze. The predictable world our ancestors had learned to read suddenly became indecipherable. Yet they survived. Not just survived, but innovated. From this brutal period emerged new technologies, new social structures, new ways of understanding the world. In many regions, the first evidence of agriculture appears shortly after this climate disaster. This presents us with a profound paradox. How did a global catastrophe that should have decimated human populations instead seemingly accelerate human innovation? What exactly happened during those 13 centuries of unexpected cold? The conventional narrative suggests that humans simply endured, clinging to existence through sheer tenacity. But recent archaeological discoveries paint a different picture, one of remarkable adaptation and previously unrecognized sophistication. From Scotland to Syria, from the American plains to ancient China, evidence is emerging of technological and cultural leaps that traditional timelines can't explain. Secret knowledge, preserved through generations, that bridges our understanding of human capability. Tools that shouldn't exist yet. Agricultural practices that appeared too early. Social structures that seem impossibly advanced. And most intriguingly, patterns that suggest these innovations weren't isolated, but somehow connected across vast distances. This evidence challenges not just when we developed certain technologies, but who we were as a species during this pivotal time. The answers reshape our understanding of human resilience and ingenuity in the face of catastrophic change. Tonight, we will explore what happened during this mysterious period and why the evidence challenges everything we thought we knew about our ancestors. We'll examine archaeological sites long overlooked, artifacts misinterpreted, and ancient knowledge dismissed. We'll question whether the seeds of civilization were actually planted not during times of abundance, but in humanity's desperate response to disaster. And we'll consider what this might tell us about our own capacity to face the climate challenges looming in our future. The Younger Dryas wasn't just a climate event. It was perhaps the greatest test humanity ever faced. A test that reveals secrets about who we are and what we're capable of when everything we know is suddenly taken away. As we journey through this story together, I invite you to consider not just what our ancestors endured, but how their response to crisis might contain wisdom we urgently need today. The answers lie buried in ice cores, hidden in cave paintings, and preserved in the very DNA of plants we still cultivate. This is a story about the past, yes, but it's also about resilience, innovation, and the remarkable adaptability of our species. It's about what happens when humans are pushed to the very edge of extinction and somehow push back. In the quietest moments of your deepest sleep tonight, perhaps you'll dream of those ancient ancestors, huddled against the returning ice, sharing whispered knowledge that would eventually change the world. Knowledge we're only now beginning to understand. Chapter 2: The Anomaly Within the Ice. Why should we care about a cold snap that occurred nearly 13 millennia ago? What possible relevance could the Younger Dryas have to our modern world with its satellites, smartphones, and supercomputers? The answer lies not in the climate event itself, but in humanity's response to it. Consider this. Throughout human history, our species has faced countless challenges: wars, plagues, natural disasters. But none compare to the scale and suddenness of the Younger Dryas. It was a planetary emergency that affected every human society then in existence. If we accept the conventional narrative, humans simply endured this period through luck and stubborn survival. But if the emerging evidence is correct, something far more significant occurred: a fundamental shift in human capability that may have altered our evolutionary trajectory. This matters because it suggests that extreme adversity might not just test human resilience. It might actually accelerate human development in ways we've never fully appreciated. It raises profound questions about the relationship between crisis and creativity. Imagine discovering that agriculture, the foundation of civilization itself, emerged not as a natural progression during favorable conditions, but as a desperate innovation during climate collapse. This would fundamentally alter our understanding of human history and capability. The stakes are equally significant for how we understand our present moment. We stand at the threshold of our own climate crisis, one that threatens to disrupt the foundations of modern life in ways both predictable and unforeseen. What if the secrets to our survival lie not in our technological sophistication, but in ancient wisdom developed during that first great climate collapse? What if our ancestors encoded their solutions in ways we've overlooked, dismissed, or simply failed to recognize? The evidence we'll examine suggests something remarkable: that during the Younger Dryas, humans didn't just survive by chance. They developed systematic approaches to environmental chaos that allowed certain communities to thrive while others perished. Some of these approaches appear to have been technological: new hunting tools, new food preservation methods, new materials. Others were social: new forms of knowledge transmission, cooperation, and resource sharing that maximized collective survival chances. Most intriguingly, some evidence points to psychological adaptations, new ways of perceiving time, anticipating change, and maintaining cultural memory through generations of unprecedented instability. These may have permanently altered human consciousness. If we can decode these adaptations correctly, we might uncover not just historical curiosities, but survival strategies relevant to our own uncertain future. The Younger Dryas becomes not just an academic puzzle, but a case study in human adaptation with immediate applications. The traditional timeline of human development places the first true civilizations around 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia and Egypt. But what if sophisticated human societies emerged much earlier, only to be obscured by the very catastrophe that spawned them? Archaeological sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, with massive stone monuments dating to 9,600 BCE, immediately after the Younger Dryas, suggest capabilities we never imagined our ancestors possessed. How did such monumental architecture appear seemingly from nowhere? Similar anomalies exist worldwide: advanced metallurgy appearing too early, astronomical knowledge too precise for primitive peoples, agricultural practices too sophisticated for supposed first attempts. The conventional timeline struggles to explain these outliers. What if these aren't anomalies at all, but surviving fragments of knowledge developed during the Younger Dryas? What if the most significant leap in human history occurred not during recorded history, but in the desperate adaptation to catastrophic climate change? This possibility changes everything. It suggests that civilization as we understand it might be much older than we thought, that sophisticated human societies might have risen and fallen long before we began writing their histories. It means we might be heirs to ancient wisdom we've forgotten, wisdom specifically evolved to help humans navigate dramatic environmental change, wisdom that could prove invaluable as we face our own climate challenges. The implications extend beyond archaeology into how we understand human potential itself. If our ancestors could rapidly innovate under the most extreme conditions, what does this reveal about our own adaptability? What are we capable of when truly tested? More unsettling is the question of what we've lost. If sophisticated knowledge systems did develop during the Younger Dryas, how much of that wisdom has disappeared? How many solutions to human survival problems have we forgotten? In indigenous cultures worldwide, we find curious references to ancient teachers who brought knowledge during times of great change. These stories, long dismissed as mere myth, take on new significance when viewed through the lens of the Younger Dryas adaptation. What if these weren't myths at all, but cultural memories of real innovations and innovators? What if they represent attempts to preserve crucial survival knowledge through oral tradition when written language didn't yet exist? As we examine the evidence together, we're not just exploring an academic question. We're recovering lost human capability. We're reconnecting with the most profound human talent, the ability to not just survive catastrophe, but to emerge from it stronger, wiser, more innovative. The stakes couldn't be higher. In understanding what our ancestors accomplished during the Younger Dryas, we might rediscover not just where we came from, but who we truly are, and what we might yet become in the face of our own existential challenges. Chapter 3: The World Before the Freeze. To understand the true significance of the Younger Dryas event, we must first understand the world that preceded it. Approximately 20,000 years ago, our planet was in the grip of the last glacial maximum, the peak of the most recent ice age. Massive ice sheets covered much of North America, Northern Europe, and Asia. Sea levels were approximately 125 meters lower than today. The geography of our world would have been unrecognizable. Britain connected to continental Europe, Indonesia joined to mainland Asia. Human populations were sparse, concentrated in refugia, livable pockets amidst harsh conditions. Total global human population may have been less than 1 million individuals. These were anatomically modern humans, indistinguishable from us, but living in a profoundly different world. They were exclusively hunter-gatherers, following seasonal migrations of animals and plants. Their technologies were sophisticated but portable: crafted stone tools, bone needles, spear throwers, woven containers. Their knowledge of local environments was encyclopedic, passed through oral tradition. Then, beginning around 19,000 years ago, something changed. The planet began to warm. The process was gradual at first, then accelerated. By 14,500 years ago, the warming trend was dramatic. Ice sheets retreated. Forests expanded. New territories opened up. This period, known as the Late Glacial Interstadial, offered human populations unprecedented opportunities. Game animals multiplied. Plant resources flourished. The warming world seemed to promise abundance after millennia of scarcity and struggle. Human populations responded by expanding into newly habitable territories. Archaeological evidence shows rapid movement into previously icebound regions. New cultural adaptations emerged: specialized hunting techniques, new tools, more permanent settlements. In parts of the Near East, communities like the Natufian culture began establishing semi-permanent settlements. They constructed stone buildings, created storage facilities, and intensified their harvesting of wild cereals. The first tentative steps toward a sedentary lifestyle were underway. Similar adaptations were occurring independently around the world. In East Asia, pottery appeared, among the earliest in the world, suggesting new ways of storing and processing food. In North America, the Clovis culture developed distinctive hunting technologies to target large game. The warming world seemed to be rewarding innovation. Communities that developed specialized knowledge and tools thrived. Human cultural diversity exploded as populations adapted to new environmental niches. The future looked promising. And then, approximately 12,800 years ago, something extraordinary happened. The warming trend that had defined the previous 6,000 years reversed, dramatically and suddenly. Within perhaps as little as a single human generation, temperatures plummeted to near-glacial conditions. The event was global, though its effects were most pronounced in the northern hemisphere. In Greenland ice cores, the evidence is stark: an average temperature drop of perhaps 15 degrees Celsius, 27 degrees Fahrenheit within decades. A catastrophic and unprecedented reversal of climate fortune. The cause remains debated. Leading theories include a massive meltwater pulse disrupting ocean circulation, an extraterrestrial impact, volcanic eruptions, or some combination of these factors. But the effect is clear: a world that had been warming for millennia suddenly froze. For human communities that had adapted to the warming trend, the consequences were devastating. Plant communities shifted or collapsed. Animal migration patterns changed. Water sources disappeared. The environmental knowledge accumulated over generations suddenly became obsolete. Imagine the psychological impact. Communities that had begun to establish more permanent relationships with their landscapes forced back into extreme mobility or starvation. The promise of stability vanished almost overnight. The archaeological record shows clear evidence of cultural disruption. The Natufian culture fragmented. The Clovis culture disappeared. Across the northern hemisphere, human populations contracted, relocated, or vanished entirely from the archaeological record. Yet this isn't a simple story of collapse, because hidden within this disruption are curious anomalies, evidence of innovations that shouldn't have been possible during such catastrophic conditions. Innovations that challenge our understanding of human capability. In Europe, new hunting technologies appeared, more sophisticated projectile points, specialized trapping methods. In the Levant, the first evidence of deliberate plant cultivation emerges. In Southeast Asia, new forms of social organization are suggested by changing settlement patterns. These weren't desperate, haphazard responses to crisis. They represent systematic, sophisticated adaptations that required abstract thinking, planning, and transgenerational knowledge transfer, all during a period of extreme environmental stress. More puzzling still, some of these innovations show curious similarities across vast distances, regions where direct contact seems impossible given the transportation technologies available. This suggests either independent invention of similar solutions or knowledge networks we haven't recognized. Recent genetic studies add another layer of complexity. Analysis of ancient DNA suggests population movements during this period that don't align with simple climate refugee patterns. Some groups appear to have deliberately relocated to specific areas that later became agricultural centers. The Younger Dryas wasn't just a climate catastrophe that humans endured. It appears to have been a selective pressure that triggered specific adaptations that laid the groundwork for the later development of what we call civilization. This challenges our fundamental understanding of human development. If sophisticated innovations emerged during climate collapse rather than climate stability, we need to reconsider the relationship between environmental conditions and human creativity. Most provocatively, it suggests that moments of extreme crisis might reveal human capabilities that remain dormant during periods of stability. That adversity doesn't just test human resilience, it might actually unlock latent human potential. As we'll discover, the evidence for this revolutionary idea has been hiding in plain sight, overlooked because it contradicts our assumptions about when and how humans developed their most important innovations. But first, we need to examine exactly what happened as the world froze. Chapter 4. Whispers from the Abyss. Our first concrete evidence of the Younger Dryas comes from a seemingly humble source: layered ice cores extracted from the Greenland ice sheet. These frozen time capsules contain atmospheric samples going back tens of thousands of years, preserved bubble by bubble. When scientists analyze the oxygen isotope ratios in these bubbles, they can determine the temperature at the time the ice formed. The data reveals something shocking: a temperature drop so severe and abrupt that it defies easy explanation. Within what may have been mere decades, average temperatures in the northern hemisphere plummeted by up to 15 degrees Celsius, 27 degrees Fahrenheit. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the difference between modern Miami and modern Alaska, occurring within a human lifetime. The transition wasn't gradual. It wasn't a gentle slide back into cooler conditions. It was a climate cliff, a threshold crossed so rapidly that plant and animal communities had no time to adapt through normal evolutionary processes. Pollen records tell us what happened next. Forests that had been expanding northward for millennia suddenly died back. Temperate species vanished from vast regions. Arctic and tundra plants reappeared in areas that had been warming for thousands of years. Animal populations show similar disruption. Large herbivores that had thrived during the warming period, mammoth, mastodon, giant ground sloth, and others, begin disappearing from the fossil record. The timing aligns too perfectly with the Younger Dryas to be coincidental. What makes this event truly unique is not just its severity, but its selectivity. Some regions were devastated while others were barely affected. Some species vanished while closely related ones survived. Some human groups disappeared while others innovated and expanded. This pattern of differential impact provides our first clue that something more complex than simple climate determinism was at work. The Younger Dryas wasn't just a test of biological hardiness. It was a test of adaptability, knowledge, and social organization. The traditional narrative suggests that humans simply endured this period, surviving through mobility, flexibility, and luck until conditions improved. But this narrative fails to explain curious anomalies that appear in the archaeological record precisely during this period of extreme stress. Consider Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, a monumental complex of stone circles with intricate carvings, dating to approximately 9,600 BCE, immediately after the Younger Dryas. The site required sophisticated planning, organization, and astronomical knowledge to construct. Orthodox archaeology struggles to explain how hunter-gatherers could build such a complex site without agriculture, writing, or metal tools. But what if Göbekli Tepe wasn't the beginning of something, but the surviving remnant of knowledge developed during the Younger Dryas? Similar anomalies appear worldwide. In the Fertile Crescent, we find the first evidence of deliberate cultivation of wild cereals precisely during the Younger Dryas, not after conditions improved, but while they were at their worst. In North America, after the disappearance of the Clovis culture, we see the emergence of highly specialized regional adaptations, Folsom, Dalton, and others, each with sophisticated technologies tailored to specific post-Younger Dryas environments. In China's Yangtze River Valley, early evidence of rice domestication coincides with the Younger Dryas period. In Japan, some of the world's earliest pottery appears. In South America, early evidence of potato cultivation emerges in the high Andes. These aren't isolated curiosities. They represent a pattern, a global pattern of innovation precisely when conventional wisdom would predict only desperate survival. This contradicts our fundamental assumptions about when and why humans develop new technologies. Even more puzzling is the nature of these innovations. They weren't simple, impromptu adaptations. Many required multi-generational experimentation, careful observation, and abstract thinking, botanical knowledge for early agriculture, astronomical knowledge for monuments like Göbekli Tepe. How could communities develop such sophisticated knowledge while struggling for basic survival? The traditional model of human innovation, where surplus resources create leisure time for experimentation, fails to explain innovation during periods of extreme scarcity. Recent archaeological discoveries provide tantalizing clues. At Shebeka 1 in Jordan, researchers found evidence of bread-making dating to 14,400 years ago, at least 4,000 years before agriculture was thought to have begun. The bread contained wild cereal grains. This suggests that the knowledge foundation for agriculture, understanding plant processing, storage, and preparation, existed long before systematic cultivation. The Younger Dryas may not have inspired the invention of these techniques, but their systematic application. Similar evidence appears at sites like Abu Huraira in Syria, where wild cereal harvesting intensified during the Younger Dryas. Analysis of the plant remains suggests not random gathering, but selective harvesting of specific genetic variants, the beginning of crop domestication. The pattern repeats with animal domestication. Recent genetic studies suggest that dog domestication, our first animal partnership, may have intensified during the Younger Dryas. The timing makes intuitive sense. In a world of scarce resources, cooperation becomes essential. What emerges is a radical possibility, that the foundations of civilization weren't laid during times of abundance and stability, but during the most severe climate crisis humans had ever faced. That crisis didn't just test humans, it transformed them. This transformation appears to have occurred through specific adaptations. First, the development of transgenerational knowledge systems, methods to preserve and transmit critical information across multiple human lifetimes despite environmental chaos. Second, new social structures that maximize collective survival through cooperation, specialization, and resource sharing. The archaeological evidence shows changes in settlement patterns suggesting more complex social organization during this period. Third, the development of predictive technologies, ways to anticipate environmental changes and prepare for them. Astronomical observations, seasonal markers, and other methods of tracking time become increasingly sophisticated. Together, These adaptations represent a fundamental shift in how humans related to their environment, from reactive to proactive, from immediate adaptation to long-term planning. This shift may have permanently altered human consciousness, but the most provocative evidence is still emerging. New archaeological techniques are revealing previously invisible connections between seemingly isolated human groups during this period. Connections that suggest knowledge sharing across vast distances. Chemical analysis of artifacts, ancient DNA studies, and isotope analysis of human remains all point to movement and contact between distant regions, movement that doesn't fit simple migration patterns. These appear to be deliberate journeys, perhaps to exchange critical knowledge. What if the Younger Dryas created not just local adaptations, but the first global human response to environmental crisis? What if the common elements we see in post-Younger Dryas cultures worldwide aren't coincidental, but evidence of shared solutions? This possibility forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about human history. If sophisticated knowledge systems developed during the Younger Dryas and spread between distant human groups, then civilization may be thousands of years older than we thought. More importantly, it suggests that our ancestors possessed capabilities we've underestimated. The ability to innovate systematically under the most extreme conditions, to preserve and transmit critical knowledge without writing, to cooperate across vast distances despite limited technology. As we prepare to examine the specific innovations that emerged from this period, a profound question looms. What if the most important human adaptations weren't technological at all, but cognitive? What if the real legacy of the Younger Dryas was a new way of thinking? A way of thinking that could anticipate problems before they arrived, that could store solutions for crises that might not occur for generations, that could imagine alternative futures and prepare for them. A way of thinking that might be desperately needed in our own time. Chapter 5. The Innovations That Shouldn't Exist. Conventional archaeology has long held that human innovation follows a predictable pattern, gradual improvement during periods of stability and resource abundance. Crisis and scarcity are seen as innovation killers, forcing humans into mere survival mode with no capacity for creative thinking. Yet the archaeological evidence from the Younger Dryas tells a different story. Instead of innovation grinding to a halt during this climate catastrophe, we see an explosion of new technologies and techniques, many appearing centuries or even millennia too early in the conventional timeline. Let's examine these anomalies more closely, beginning with the emergence of agriculture. The standard narrative places the first systematic cultivation of crops around 10,000 BCE, after the Younger Dryas ended and climate conditions stabilized and warmed. This timing seemed logical. Agriculture requires predictable growing seasons, stable precipitation patterns, and surplus labor. The chaos of the Younger Dryas should have made agriculture impossible, or at least impractical compared to traditional hunting and gathering. Yet sites like Abu Huraira in Syria present a puzzling contradiction. Archaeobotanical analysis reveals evidence of systematic cereal cultivation beginning around 13,000 BCE, during the height of Younger Dryas climate instability. The plant remains shows signs of deliberate selection for specific traits, larger seeds, non-shattering seed heads, and other characteristics that mark the transition from wild gathering to deliberate cultivation. This wasn't accidental or opportunistic. It was systematic and intentional. Similar evidence appears at sites across the Fertile Crescent. At Tel Karamal in northern Syria, researchers found sophisticated grain processing tools dating to the Younger Dryas period. At Dra in Jordan, primitive granaries appear, structures specifically designed for long-term seed storage. These aren't the tentative experiments we would expect from humans first discovering agriculture. They represent a sophisticated understanding of plant genetics, seasonal cycles, and food preservation, knowledge that should have taken centuries of stable conditions to develop. Even more puzzling is the evidence for simultaneous but independent agricultural innovation in distant parts of the world during this same period. In China's Yangtze Valley, early rice domestication appears. In Mesoamerica, the first evidence of squash cultivation emerges. The standard explanation, that agriculture was invented multiple times independently after the Younger Dryas, becomes increasingly problematic. The timing is too coincidental, the innovations too similar despite vastly different environments and plant species. What if we've misunderstood the relationship between crisis and innovation? What if the Younger Dryas didn't prevent agricultural development, but actually catalyzed it? What if the extreme unpredictability of wild food sources made controlled cultivation worth the enormous investment? This reframing would explain not just when agriculture emerged, but why. Not as an opportunistic response to abundance, but as a strategic adaptation to scarcity. Not as a way to create surplus, but as a way to reduce uncertainty. The anomalies extend beyond agriculture. Consider the case of Göbekli Tepe in southern Turkey, a monumental complex that rewrote archaeological textbooks when it was discovered. The site features massive T-shaped pillars arranged in circles, many decorated with detailed animal carvings. Radiocarbon dating places Göbekli Tepe's construction around 9600 BCE, immediately after the Younger Dryas, but long before humans were supposed to have the social organization, architectural knowledge, or resource surplus to create monumental architecture. Orthodox archaeology struggled to explain how simple hunter-gatherers could create such a complex site. But what if Göbekli Tepe wasn't the beginning of something, but the culmination? What if it represents knowledge developed during the Younger Dryas, finally expressed when conditions permitted? The astronomical alignments at Göbekli Tepe suggest sophisticated understanding of celestial cycles. The consistency of construction implies standardized measurement systems. The organization required to build it suggests social hierarchies and specialized labor. These capabilities didn't appear from nowhere. They must have developed over generations, preserved and transmitted despite the chaos of the Younger Dryas. This suggests knowledge systems far more sophisticated than previously attributed to pre-agricultural societies. Similar, too early, monumental sites appear elsewhere. Gunung Padang in Indonesia, long thought to be a natural hill, has recently been identified as a massive artificial structure with portions potentially dating to the Younger Dryas period or earlier. In North America, sites like Poverty Point show evidence of complex earthwork construction beginning shortly after the Younger Dryas. In Japan, some of the world's earliest pottery appears during this period. Technology that requires sophisticated understanding of materials and firing techniques. These anomalies create a pattern too consistent to dismiss. Across multiple continents, human groups developed complex technologies and social organizations during or immediately after the Younger Dryas that shouldn't have been possible according to conventional models. The evidence suggests something profound. The Younger Dryas didn't just test human survival. It created conditions that actively selected for specific cognitive and social adaptations. Groups that developed these adaptations survived and eventually thrived. Those that didn't disappeared. What were these adaptations? First, enhanced temporal cognition, the ability to think across longer timescales, to store information for future generations, to anticipate problems before they arrive. The Younger Dryas made this capacity essential for survival. Second, new forms of social organization that maximized collective knowledge and resource sharing. The archaeological record shows changes in settlement patterns during this period, suggesting more complex social hierarchies and specialized roles within groups. Third, systematic observational methodologies, ways of gathering, testing, and preserving environmental knowledge across generations without writing. The precision of astronomical alignments at post-Younger Dryas sites suggests systematic observation over centuries. Together, these adaptations represent a fundamental shift in human cognitive and social capacity, a shift that laid the groundwork for later developments we associate with civilization, agriculture, architecture, metallurgy, writing, and complex social organization. This challenges our most basic assumptions about human development. If these capabilities emerged during a period of extreme environmental stress rather than stability and abundance, we must reconsider the relationship between crisis and innovation. What if the most significant leaps in human development have always been responses to existential threats? What if comfort and stability actually slow innovation rather than enabling it? What if we are at our most creative not when secure, but when challenged to our very limits? This reframing has profound implications not just for how we understand our past, but for how we approach our future. As we face our own climate crisis, one with disturbing parallels to the Younger Dryas, perhaps our ancestors left us more than artifacts. Perhaps they left us a blueprint for innovation under pressure. For adaptation when the unthinkable occurs. For preserving essential knowledge through generations of chaos. For transforming crisis into opportunity not just to survive, but to fundamentally evolve as a species. The evidence is there in the ground, in ice cores, in pollen samples, and in the very genes of the plants we still cultivate. Evidence of a response to catastrophe so effective that it changed the course of human history. We just haven't been looking at it correctly. Chapter 6. The Memory Keepers. Beyond the physical evidence of archaeology lies another realm of clues to the Younger Dryas innovations, the myths, legends, and oral histories preserved by cultures worldwide. These stories, often dismissed as mere fantasy or primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena, take on new significance. When we examine these narratives through the lens of the Younger Dryas event, curious patterns emerge. Across disconnected cultures, separated by vast distances and millennia, we find remarkably similar accounts of a global catastrophe followed by the arrival of culture-bearing teachers. These civilizing heroes are described as bringing essential knowledge during a time of darkness and cold: agriculture, astronomy, architecture, medicine, metallurgy. They establish new social orders, new ritual practices, new ways of relating to the environment. In Mesoamerica, the Aztec tradition speaks of Quetzalcoatl, who taught humans agriculture, calendar systems, and writing after a period of darkness. In Andean tradition, Viracocha emerges from Lake Titicaca after a great flood to bring civilization to a chaotic world. In Egypt, Osiris teaches agriculture, laws, and religious practices. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu, fish-like sages, emerge from the waters to instruct humans in essential knowledge. In India, the Saptarishi or seven sages preserve wisdom through a global catastrophe. Conventional interpretation treats these as separate mythological developments, but their similarities become striking when mapped against the Younger Dryas timeline. They consistently describe knowledge preservation and transmission during or immediately following a global catastrophe. What if these aren't separate myths at all, but cultural memories of a real historical process? The transmission of survival knowledge developed during the Younger Dryas. What if they encode actual adaptation strategies preserved through generations of oral tradition? The timing is suggestive. Many of these traditions place their civilizing heroes at the beginning of their historical consciousness, at the threshold between a chaotic, before time, and the ordered world of history. This aligns precisely with the Younger Dryas to Holocene transition. More intriguing are the specific kinds of knowledge these teachers bring. Exactly the innovations that appear in the archaeological record during or immediately after the Younger Dryas: agriculture, astronomy, architecture, social organization, and medicine. These traditions often emphasize that this knowledge was not newly discovered but preserved, carried through the catastrophe by individuals or groups specifically tasked with maintaining essential wisdom. They describe not invention but transmission. This pattern appears even in surviving indigenous traditions. Aboriginal Australian songlines, Polynesian navigational knowledge, Native American medicine practices, all emphasize their origins with ancestral knowledge keepers who preserved wisdom through times of great change. This suggests something revolutionary. What if the Younger Dryas crisis created not just local adaptations, but a systematic, perhaps even coordinated human response? What if certain groups became specialized knowledge preservers, the memory keepers for all humanity? The archaeological record provides tantalizing support for this possibility. During and after the Younger Dryas, we see the first evidence of specialized ritual structures, distinct from ordinary dwellings. Places like Göbekli Tepe appear to be knowledge centers rather than settlements. These sites often contain imagery that seems designed to encode information: astronomical alignments, abstract symbols, detailed animal representations. They show evidence of repeated use over generations, suggesting their purpose was transgenerational knowledge transmission. We also find evidence of long-distance trade networks establishing or intensifying during this period, not just exchange of materials, but potentially of information. Distinctive symbols and techniques appear almost simultaneously at sites separated by thousands of miles. Modern anthropological research with surviving indigenous knowledge systems reveals sophisticated methods for preserving complex information across generations without writing, methods that combine rhythm, imagery, spatial association, and ritual repetition. These systems can maintain precise information with remarkable fidelity for dozens or even hundreds of generations. Australian Aboriginal songlines, for example, have preserved accurate coastal geography descriptions from before sea level rise flooded these areas 10,000 years ago. What if similar systems developed or intensified during the Younger Dryas as a specific adaptation to environmental unpredictability? What if certain individuals or groups specialized in maintaining this knowledge while others focused on immediate survival needs? This division of cognitive labor would have been an evolutionary advantage, allowing communities to both address immediate crises and preserve long-term adaptive knowledge. It would explain the emergence of specialized roles we see in post-Younger Dryas societies. It would also explain another archaeological anomaly, the appearance of what archaeologists call out-of-place artifacts. These are objects, structures, or knowledge that appear too sophisticated for their time period or location according to conventional chronologies. Consider the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek astronomical computer recovered from a shipwreck, dating to approximately 100 BCE. Its sophistication suggests mechanical knowledge developing not over decades, but centuries or millennia of systematic observation and calculation. Or the Baghdad battery, a ceramic vessel containing a copper cylinder and iron rod that could have produced electrical current, dating to the Parthian period, 250 BCE to 224 CE. The knowledge to create such a device implies understanding of electrochemical principles. Conventional archaeology typically dismisses these as either misidentified, misdated, or isolated inventions that led nowhere. But what if they represent fragments of knowledge systems developed during or after the Younger Dryas, preserved through specialized lineages? This would explain why they appear isolated in the archaeological record. They represent surviving fragments of more comprehensive knowledge systems mostly lost to time, preserved by specific groups but eventually disappearing as those transmission chains were broken. The most compelling evidence for this possibility comes from astronomical knowledge preserved in ancient structures. Sites worldwide show precise alignment with celestial events, alignments that required observations over centuries to establish with such accuracy. Newgrange in Ireland, built around 3200 BCE, captures the winter solstice sunrise with remarkable precision. Similar alignments appear at sites across Europe, the Americas, Asia, and Africa, often incorporating knowledge of complex celestial cycles like the precession of the equinoxes. This knowledge requires systematic observation over timescales far longer than a human lifetime. It requires institutional memory, dedicated structures, and roles for knowledge preservation. Exactly the kind of adaptation that would have emerged during the Younger Dryas. Perhaps most intriguing are the mathematical constants encoded in ancient sites, proportions and measurements that appear across disconnected cultures. The sacred geometry found in structures worldwide suggests shared mathematical understanding transmitted across vast distances and time periods. We find the same ratios, phi, pi, the Fibonacci sequence, encoded in structures from Egypt to Cambodia, from Greece to Mexico. These aren't simple proportions that might be independently discovered, but complex mathematical relationships requiring sophisticated abstract thinking. The conventional explanation that these similarities are coincidental or reflect universal human aesthetic preferences becomes increasingly strained as more examples are discovered. The precision and consistency suggest deliberate knowledge transmission rather than coincidence. What emerges is a provocative possibility that during the Younger Dryas, human groups developed sophisticated systems for preserving and transmitting essential knowledge. These systems became the foundation for later developments we associate with civilization. The myths of civilizing heroes, the astronomical knowledge encoded in ancient structures, the mathematical constants that appear across cultures, all may be echoes of this Younger Dryas knowledge transmission network, fragments of wisdom preserved through millennia. If this is true, it forces us to completely reconsider human history. The sophisticated knowledge systems we associate with later civilizations didn't emerge from nothing. They were built upon foundations laid during humanity's response to the greatest climate catastrophe we had ever faced. And it raises a profound question. What other knowledge might our ancestors have preserved that we have yet to rediscover? What wisdom developed during the Younger Dryas might still be encoded in myths, structures, and traditions we haven't properly decoded. Chapter 7. The Extinction of Experience. As we piece together the evidence of Younger Dryas innovations and knowledge transmission, a more troubling question emerges. What have we lost? What essential wisdom, developed during humanity's most profound climate crisis, has disappeared from our collective memory? Archaeologists speak of a phenomenon they call the extinction of experience, the loss of knowledge, skills, and perceptual capabilities that occurs when ways of life disappear. As technologies change and societies transform, entire domains of human capability can vanish almost overnight. We see evidence of this throughout history. When writing systems replaced oral tradition, certain memory techniques disappeared. When industrial agriculture replaced traditional farming, botanical knowledge accumulated over millennia began to fade. When GPS replaced celestial navigation, wayfinding skills diminished. The Younger Dryas may have produced humanity's greatest flowering of crisis-adaptive knowledge. But as the emergency passed and stability returned, much of that knowledge likely became less immediately relevant. The memory keepers continued their work, but their context had changed. As agricultural societies developed into early states and eventually empires, knowledge became increasingly specialized and institutionalized. The holistic wisdom systems of hunter-gatherer and early agricultural societies fragmented into separate domains: religion, science, governance. This fragmentation had advantages. Specialization allowed for deeper development of specific knowledge areas. But it also created vulnerability. When one knowledge stream was disrupted or destroyed, its connections to other domains were lost, making recovery more difficult. We can see this process in the destruction of indigenous knowledge systems through colonization. When European powers conquered the Americas, they didn't just destroy political structures. They systematically dismantled knowledge systems developed over thousands of years. Similar processes occurred worldwide as industrial civilization expanded. Traditional ecological knowledge, sophisticated sustainability practices, and crisis-adaptive wisdom accumulated since the Younger Dryas were dismissed as primitive superstition rather than recognized as tested survival strategies. The stakes of this knowledge loss become clear when we examine what was preserved. Indigenous agricultural systems often demonstrate sophisticated ecological understanding. Intercropping methods, soil conservation techniques, and climate-adaptive strategies developed over millennia. Traditional medicine systems worldwide contain pharmacological knowledge rediscovered by modern science only in recent decades. Many traditional architectural techniques demonstrate climate adaptation strategies more sophisticated than contemporary buildings in the same regions. These surviving knowledge fragments suggest what we've lost was not primitive or simplistic, but sophisticated, tested, and refined over thousands of years. Knowledge specifically developed to help humans thrive through environmental change and uncertainty. The most concerning aspect of this loss relates directly to climate adaptation. The Younger Dryas was humanity's first encounter with rapid, severe climate change. The knowledge developed in response was our species' first comprehensive climate adaptation strategy, and we've forgotten most of it. This realization transforms our investigation from academic curiosity to urgent recovery mission. If our ancestors developed effective strategies for surviving climate catastrophe, these aren't just archaeological curiosities. They're potentially vital knowledge for our own climate-threatened future. The parallels between the Younger Dryas and contemporary climate change are disturbing. Both involve rapid shifts beyond normal variability. Both affect global systems while having localized impacts of varying severity. Both require coordinated human response across generations. Of course, there are significant differences. Our population is vastly larger, our technologies more advanced, our scientific understanding more comprehensive. But the fundamental challenge remains the same: how to adapt human societies to rapidly changing environmental conditions. The stakes could not be higher. As we face accelerating climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion, we're entering uncharted territory, or at least territory we haven't navigated for nearly 13,000 years since the end of the Younger Dryas. What if some of the solutions we desperately need were developed by our ancestors during their climate crisis and then lost? What if effective adaptation strategies are hiding in plain sight, encoded in fragments of myth, traditional practices, and archaeological remains. Recent research offers tantalizing hints of what we might recover. Studies of traditional ecological knowledge reveal sophisticated understanding of ecosystem management. Analysis of indigenous agricultural systems shows remarkable resilience to climate variability. Traditional social structures often contain embedded risk distribution mechanisms that help communities weather environmental crises. Many indigenous cultures maintain decision-making processes specifically designed for long-term sustainability rather than short-term gain. These surviving knowledge fragments suggest the Younger Dryas adaptations weren't just technological, but social, cognitive, and spiritual, holistic systems that addressed human survival needs at multiple levels simultaneously. This holistic quality may be precisely what we're missing in our current approach to climate change. Modern responses tend to be fragmented, technological solutions disconnected from social systems, economic measures separated from ecological understanding, scientific knowledge divorced from ethical frameworks. What if the most important Younger Dryas innovation wasn't a specific technology or practice, but a way of integrating knowledge domains? What if our ancestors developed methods for maintaining whole system thinking across generations specifically to address climate instability? This possibility is supported by the structure of many indigenous knowledge systems, which often integrate practical techniques, social organization, ethical frameworks, and spiritual practices into coherent wholes. These aren't separate domains, but aspects of unified approaches to survival. The archaeological evidence suggests such integrated systems emerged or intensified during the Younger Dryas. Sites like Göbekli Tepe appear to combine astronomical observation, communal gathering, artistic expression, and knowledge transmission in single multifunctional spaces. The myths of civilizing heroes consistently describe the introduction of integrated knowledge systems, not just isolated technologies, but comprehensive approaches to organizing human life in relationship with environmental conditions. If these systems were indeed humanity's adaptive response to our first global climate crisis, their loss represents not just a gap in our historical understanding, but a potentially catastrophic gap in our adaptive capacity as we face our own climate emergency. This transforms the stakes of our investigation. We're not just exploring an academic question about ancient innovation. We're engaged in urgent knowledge recovery, attempting to reconstruct adaptive wisdom developed during humanity's previous encounter with climate catastrophe. The implications extend beyond archaeology into how we approach our current crisis. What if the fragmentation of knowledge into specialized domains, a process that accelerated with industrialization, has actually reduced our collective capacity to respond effectively to systemic challenges? What if the most important lesson from the Younger Dryas isn't a specific adaptation, but the need for integrated knowledge systems that can address environmental, social, technological, and spiritual dimensions of human experience simultaneously? This would explain why modern climate responses often feel inadequate. They address fragments of the challenge rather than the whole system. They lack the integrative framework that may have been the most significant Younger Dryas innovation. As we proceed deeper into our investigation, the question expands beyond what specific techniques our ancestors developed. We must ask how they organized knowledge itself, how they preserved, transmitted, and applied their understanding across generations of environmental chaos. The answer may lie in what archaeologists have long dismissed as merely ceremonial or religious: the ritual structures, symbolic systems, and mythic narratives that appear or intensify during and after the Younger Dryas. What if these weren't separate from practical survival knowledge, but the very systems designed to preserve and transmit it? What if the distinction between practical and symbolic, between technological and spiritual, is itself a modern fragmentation that blinds us to integrated systems? This possibility forces us to re-examine evidence we've long misinterpreted, to look at ancient sites not just as monuments or temples, but as knowledge transmission devices, at myths not just as stories, but as encoded adaptive strategies, at rituals not just as superstition, but as embodied memory. The stakes of this re-examination could not be higher. As our own climate crisis accelerates, we face challenges that our fragmented knowledge systems seem increasingly unable to address. We need not just new technologies, but new ways of knowing, or perhaps very old ones. In the next section, we'll examine specific evidence of these integrated knowledge systems, how they were structured, how they functioned, and how fragments survived despite millennia of disruption and loss. And we'll consider what they might offer us today. But first, we must confront the most troubling question of all. If our ancestors developed such sophisticated adaptive systems, why did we forget them? Was their loss accidental, a natural consequence of changing conditions, or was something else at work? The answer may challenge our most fundamental assumptions about human progress and the relationship between knowledge, power, and survival. It may require us to reconsider not just what we know, but how we know, and who controls what is remembered and what is forgotten. Chapter 8. The Forgotten Catalyst. As we approach the central question of the Younger Dryas adaptations, several competing theories emerge to explain the paradox of innovation during climate catastrophe. Each offers a different perspective on how human societies responded to this existential threat, and each carries profound implications for our understanding of human capability. The first theory, what we might call the selective pressure hypothesis, suggests that the Younger Dryas acted as an evolutionary bottleneck, eliminating human groups that couldn't adapt while favoring those with specific cognitive and social capabilities. In this model, the catastrophic climate shift didn't create new human capabilities but revealed latent potential that had existed but remained unexpressed during more stable periods. Crisis became the catalyst that activated dormant human adaptive capacity. This theory is supported by genetic evidence suggesting population contractions during the Younger Dryas, followed by expansions among surviving groups. It's also consistent with the archaeological pattern of cultural discontinuity followed by rapid innovation. The key insight of this theory is that environmental stress doesn't just test existing adaptations, it actively selects for new ones. The human groups that survived the Younger Dryas weren't just lucky. They possessed or developed specific capabilities that allowed them to thrive amid chaos. These capabilities appear to include enhanced temporal cognition, thinking across longer timescales, abstract pattern recognition, identifying subtle environmental signals, and complex social cooperation, sharing resources and knowledge to maximize collective survival chances. The second theory, the knowledge integration hypothesis, takes a different approach. It suggests that the key Younger Dryas adaptation wasn't new capability, but new organization of existing knowledge, the development of systematic methods to preserve and transmit survival information. This theory points to evidence of new symbolic systems appearing during and after the Younger Dryas. Cave paintings that shift from naturalistic to abstract, stone arrangements with astronomical alignments, and emerging patterns in burial practices that suggest new conceptual frameworks. What these diverse phenomena share is their function as information storage and transmission systems, methods to preserve critical knowledge across generations without writing. They represent a fundamental shift in how humans related to information itself. Before the Younger Dryas, knowledge was primarily transmitted through direct observation and imitation. The climate catastrophe made this method insufficient. Environments changed too rapidly for generation-to-generation learning to keep pace. New transmission systems became essential for survival. The third theory, the cooperation imperative, focuses on social rather than cognitive adaptations. It suggests that the Younger Dryas crisis made intense cooperation essential for survival, driving the development of new social organizations and ritual practices. Archaeological evidence supports this view. We see changes in settlement patterns during and after the Younger Dryas, from scattered, independent bands to more structured communities with evidence of specialized roles and emerging social hierarchies. Ritual spaces become more elaborate and standardized. Göbekli Tepe represents perhaps the most dramatic example, a site requiring coordinated labor from multiple communities, suggesting social organization far beyond what was previously thought possible for hunter-gatherers. What makes these theories particularly interesting is that they aren't mutually exclusive. They may represent different aspects of a complex adaptive response that integrated cognitive, social, and technological innovations into coherent systems specifically evolved to address environmental chaos. This integrated response would explain the curious pattern we see in the archaeological record: simultaneous innovations in seemingly unrelated domains. Agricultural experimentation coincides with new symbolic systems and changes in social organization, suggesting a coordinated rather than piecemeal adaptation. It would also explain the mythic patterns that appear worldwide, stories of civilizing heroes bringing integrated knowledge systems after catastrophe. These myths may encode cultural memories of this multidimensional adaptive response, preserved through oral tradition. But these theories raise a deeper question. If humans developed such sophisticated adaptive systems during the Younger Dryas, systems potentially relevant to our current climate crisis, why did we lose them? Was their disappearance inevitable, or was something else at work? This brings us to perhaps the most provocative theory, what we might call the intentional forgetting hypothesis. This suggests that certain aspects of Younger Dryas knowledge weren't lost accidentally, but deliberately suppressed as new power structures emerged in the early Holocene. As agricultural societies gave rise to early states and empires, political elites had strong incentives to control information. Knowledge systems developed during the Younger Dryas, with their emphasis on cooperative adaptation and transgenerational thinking, may have threatened emerging hierarchies. We see evidence of this suppression in the archaeological record. Sites like Göbekli Tepe were deliberately buried. Knowledge previously shared through communal ritual became increasingly restricted to specialized priesthoods. Myths were rewritten to reinforce new power structures. This theory is supported by patterns in surviving indigenous knowledge systems, which often contain embedded mechanisms to prevent knowledge monopolization, distributed expertise, overlapping transmission lines, and cross-checking practices that maintain information integrity across generations. These safeguards suggest a recognition of the danger of knowledge control, a danger that became acute as early states emerged. The fragmentation of holistic knowledge systems into separate domains, religious, political, practical, made them more vulnerable to manipulation and loss. The implication is profound. The knowledge developed during the Younger Dryas wasn't just forgotten. Significant portions may have been intentionally suppressed because they embodied ways of organizing human societies that conflicted with emerging hierarchical power structures. This perspective transforms our understanding of what was lost. Not just specific techniques or practices, but entire frameworks for organizing human societies in sustainable relationship with their environments. Frameworks that prioritized long-term adaptation over short-term exploitation. As we face our own climate crisis, this possibility takes on urgent significance. The knowledge we need most, integrated systems for sustainable adaptation, may be precisely what was systematically removed from our cultural memory as hierarchical civilizations expanded. Our task then becomes not just archaeological reconstruction, but knowledge recovery, searching for fragments of these suppressed systems in surviving indigenous traditions, in archaeological anomalies, in myths and ritual practices dismissed as primitive by colonial and industrial worldviews. The stakes could not be higher. As our fragmented approach to climate change proves increasingly inadequate, the integrated wisdom developed during humanity's previous climate catastrophe may offer essential guidance, if we can recover it before our own crisis accelerates beyond control. Chapter 9. Patterns in the Chaos. Recent scientific advances have dramatically expanded our understanding of the Younger Dryas period, revealing patterns previously invisible to archaeological investigation. New technologies, from ancient DNA analysis to isotope studies, from satellite archaeology to computational modeling, are transforming how we interpret the evidence. These methodologies allow us to see beyond individual artifacts or sites to detect large-scale patterns of human adaptation across continents and millennia. They reveal connections and commonalities that challenge conventional understanding of how human societies responded to the Younger Dryas catastrophe. One of the most significant discoveries comes from paleogenetics, the study of ancient DNA. Analysis of human remains from before, during, and after the Younger Dryas reveals something remarkable. Certain genetic signatures associated with cognitive functions appear to have undergone strong selection during this period. These include genes linked to abstract thinking, long-term planning, and social cognition, precisely the capabilities that would have been adaptive during a climate crisis requiring sophisticated environmental prediction and intense cooperation. The Younger Dryas appears to have selected for specific cognitive traits. More surprisingly, similar selection patterns appear in geographically distant populations, suggesting parallel evolutionary pressures operating worldwide. The climate catastrophe wasn't just changing cultures, it was potentially shaping human cognitive evolution itself. This genetic evidence aligns with neurological research on environmental stress and brain development. Studies show that certain kinds of stress can enhance neural connectivity related to pattern recognition, scenario planning, and social bonding. Again, capabilities essential for surviving environmental chaos. The implication is profound. The Younger Dryas may have been a pivotal moment in human cognitive evolution, selecting for and enhancing specific mental capabilities related to environmental adaptation. Our capacity to anticipate and respond to complex environmental changes may be partly a product of this ancient crisis. Equally revealing is new evidence from paleoclimatology. Advanced ice core analysis and climate modeling have revealed that the Younger Dryas wasn't a uniform climate shift, but a complex mosaic of regional changes. Some areas experienced extreme cooling, others warming, others precipitation changes. This heterogeneity created an unprecedented challenge. Human groups couldn't simply migrate to better conditions because conditions were changing unpredictably everywhere. Success required developing systems to anticipate and adapt to change itself rather than specific environmental conditions. Computational modeling suggests that under these circumstances, the most successful adaptation would be knowledge systems capable of processing environmental information across multiple timescales simultaneously, recognizing immediate patterns while tracking long-term trends. This is precisely what we see emerging in the archaeological record. Sophisticated observational systems like astronomical alignments that track both seasonal cycles and multi-generational patterns, such as the precession of the equinoxes. We also see new evidence of information exchange between distant human groups during this period. Chemical analysis of artifacts reveals trade networks expanding rather than contracting during the Younger Dryas, surprising given the harsh conditions that should have limited long-distance travel. Even more intriguing, we find similar symbolic systems appearing almost simultaneously across vast distances. Abstract patterns, astronomical references, and numerical notations that suggest not just material exchange, but knowledge sharing between groups facing similar adaptive challenges. Recent archaeological discoveries continue to push back the timeline of sophisticated human capabilities. At Karahan Tepe in Turkey, a site similar to Göbekli Tepe, new excavations reveal complex architectural features dating to the heart of the Younger Dryas period, not just its aftermath. At Monte Verde in Chile, evidence of human adaptation to rapidly changing conditions during the Younger Dryas includes sophisticated plant processing technologies and structural remains suggesting more permanent settlement than previously thought possible for this period. In North America, new analysis of Clovis and post-Clovis archaeological sites reveals more continuity than previously recognized, suggesting not collapse, but transformation of knowledge systems as human groups adapted to changing conditions. These discoveries create a consistent pattern worldwide. Human groups responding to the Younger Dryas not with social collapse, but with intensified knowledge development and exchange. The crisis appears to have catalyzed innovation rather than preventing it. This pattern contradicts fundamental assumptions about the relationship between environmental stability and human development. The conventional view holds that innovation requires surplus resources and stable conditions, precisely what the Younger Dryas eliminated. Yet the evidence increasingly suggests the opposite, that certain kinds of innovation are specifically catalyzed by environmental crisis. Not despite the Younger Dryas chaos, but because of it, humans developed new cognitive, social, and technological capabilities. This creates a profound paradox for our understanding of human development. If our most important adaptive capabilities emerge during periods of extreme environmental stress rather than stability, we must reconsider basic assumptions about when and why humans innovate. It also challenges how we approach our current climate crisis. If human adaptive capacity is actually enhanced rather than diminished by environmental challenge, our focus should shift from preventing change at all costs to developing systems that can navigate change effectively. The most provocative evidence comes from reconstructing the knowledge systems that emerged during the Younger Dryas. These weren't just collections of survival techniques, but integrated frameworks that combined practical knowledge, social organization, and cosmological understanding. We see this integration in archaeological sites worldwide. spaces that combined practical functions with astronomical observation, communal gathering, artistic expression, and knowledge transmission. These weren't separate domains, but aspects of unified adaptive systems. Recent analysis of indigenous knowledge systems provides insight into how such integrated frameworks function. They typically embed practical information in narrative, ritual, and symbolic contexts that enhance memory retention and resist distortion across generations of oral transmission. They incorporate redundancy through multiple parallel transmission methods: stories, songs, visual symbols, landscape associations, ensuring critical information survives even if one transmission line is broken. They distribute knowledge across community members while maintaining system integrity. Most importantly, they situate human activity within larger natural cycles, embedding sustainable practices in cosmological frameworks that make them resistant to short-term exploitation pressures. The practical and the symbolic aren't separate domains, but mutually reinforcing aspects of integrated knowledge systems. These characteristics precisely match what we see emerging in the archaeological record during and after the Younger Dryas, suggesting that what developed wasn't just specific technologies, but comprehensive frameworks for sustainable human adaptation to environmental change. The paradox deepens when we consider what happened to these systems. As the climate stabilized during the Holocene, the immediate adaptive pressure diminished. Knowledge systems optimized for navigating change became less obviously essential as conditions became more predictable. Yet rather than being preserved as insurance against future instability, these systems fragmented. Practical knowledge separated from symbolic understanding. Specialized expertise replaced distributed wisdom, and short-term optimization replaced long-term sustainability as organizing principles. This fragmentation accelerated with the emergence of hierarchical states, writing systems that privileged certain knowledge forms over others, and eventually industrial technologies that created the illusion of human independence from natural systems. The tragic irony is that just as we face a new climate crisis potentially as severe as the Younger Dryas, we have systematically dismantled the integrated knowledge systems our ancestors developed to navigate such challenges, replacing them with fragmented approaches that may be fundamentally inadequate. Chapter 10: The Adaptive Mind. As we integrate the evidence across archaeology, genetics, climate science, and indigenous knowledge studies, a revolutionary understanding emerges, one that transforms not just how we view our ancestors, but how we understand human capability itself. The central revelation is this: the Younger Dryas catastrophe didn't just test human survival capacity, it fundamentally transformed human consciousness. It catalyzed a cognitive and social revolution that enabled a new relationship between humans and their environment, one based on anticipation rather than reaction. Before the Younger Dryas, human adaptation was primarily reactive, responding to environmental changes after they occurred. The climate catastrophe made this strategy insufficient. Survival required developing the capacity to anticipate change before it happened and prepare accordingly. This anticipatory adaptation required profound cognitive developments, the ability to detect subtle environmental patterns, to connect seemingly unrelated phenomena, to think across longer timescales, and to encode this understanding in transmissible forms that could survive across generations. The archaeological and genetic evidence suggests these capabilities weren't entirely new, but the Younger Dryas crisis intensified their development and made them central to human survival. Groups that enhanced these capabilities survived and eventually thrived. Those that didn't disappeared. The most successful adaptations weren't isolated technologies, but integrated systems that combined practical techniques, social structures, and cosmological frameworks, what we might call adaptive knowledge ecosystems designed to maintain human viability through environmental chaos. These systems had several critical characteristics. First, they distributed knowledge across community members while maintaining coherence. No individual held all information, but collective knowledge was structured to remain functional despite individual losses. Second, they encoded information in multiple overlapping forms: narrative, ritual, symbol, practice, creating redundancy that ensured critical knowledge survived even if one transmission mode was disrupted. Knowledge vital to survival was never dependent on a single storage method. Third, they embedded practical information in meaningful contexts, cosmological frameworks that connected immediate actions to larger patterns of existence. This wasn't primitive superstition, but sophisticated information architecture that enhanced memory and transmission fidelity. Fourth, they incorporated feedback mechanisms that allowed adaptation without destruction of core knowledge, balancing conservation of tested wisdom with capacity for innovation when conditions changed. They were stable but not static, coherent but not rigid. Most importantly, these systems operated across multiple timescales simultaneously, addressing immediate survival needs while maintaining transgenerational learning processes. They could respond to daily challenges while preserving information that might not be needed for generations. This multi-temporal thinking represents perhaps the most significant Younger Dryas adaptation, the capacity to navigate what scholars call timescape complexity, maintaining awareness of and response to patterns operating at scales from days to centuries. The evidence suggests this adaptation wasn't merely cultural but neurological. The Younger Dryas crisis selected for and enhanced brain functions related to temporal cognition, pattern recognition, and social cooperation. The crisis literally shaped how humans think. This explains the explosion of symbolic expression we see during and after the Younger Dryas. Cave paintings, carved figurines, astronomical markers, abstract patterns. These weren't primitive decorations, but sophisticated information technologies designed to extend cognitive capacity across time. It also explains the myths of civilizing heroes that appear worldwide, cultural memories of this cognitive transformation encoded in narrative form. These stories describe not just new technologies, but new ways of thinking, new social structures, new relationships with the environment. Most provocatively, it suggests that the foundations of what we call civilization weren't laid during periods of abundance and stability, as conventional theory holds, but during humanity's most severe climate crisis, as adaptive responses to existential threat. Agriculture, architecture, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, metallurgy. The evidence increasingly suggests these weren't separate inventions that coincidentally emerged after the Younger Dryas, but interconnected elements of integrated adaptive systems developed during the crisis itself. This reframing transforms our understanding of human history. The conventional narrative presents civilization as the gradual accumulation of innovations during periods of environmental stability and resource surplus. The evidence suggests something far more dramatic. It appears that human consciousness itself underwent a fundamental transformation during the Younger Dryas, shifting from primarily reactive to primarily anticipatory cognition. This transformation enabled not just survival through the crisis, but the emergence of entirely new ways of being human. The tragedy is that as conditions stabilized during the Holocene and immediate survival pressure diminished, these integrated systems began to fragment. Knowledge became increasingly specialized and compartmentalized. The holistic frameworks that maintained system integrity weakened. This fragmentation accelerated with the emergence of hierarchical states that centralized knowledge control, writing systems that privileged certain forms of information over others, and eventually industrial technologies that created the illusion of human independence from natural systems. By the time Western science emerged in its modern form, the integrated knowledge ecosystems developed during the Younger Dryas had been so thoroughly dismantled that their very existence became invisible to conventional scholarship, dismissed as primitive, pre-scientific, or merely ritualistic. Yet fragments survived. In indigenous knowledge systems that maintained their integrity despite colonial suppression, in archaeological anomalies dismissed because they didn't fit conventional timelines, in myths and rituals whose deeper functions remained unrecognized. As we face our own climate crisis, these fragments take on urgent significance. The integrated adaptive systems our ancestors developed during the Younger Dryas may contain crucial wisdom for navigating our current environmental challenges, if we can reconstruct and reactivate them before it's too late. This doesn't mean abandoning modern science or technology. Rather, it means recognizing that our fragmented, specialized approach to knowledge may be fundamentally inadequate for addressing systemic challenges like climate change, and that our ancestors may have developed more effective frameworks. The central revelation of our investigation isn't just that humans survived the Younger Dryas through sophisticated adaptations, but that these adaptations represented a fundamental advance in human capability, one we've partially lost through fragmentation and specialization. Our task now becomes not just archaeological reconstruction, but cognitive reintegration, recovering not just specific techniques or practices, but the integrated frameworks that made them effective. Not just what our ancestors knew, but how they knew, their ways of organizing knowledge itself. This recovery doesn't mean returning to the past. It means bringing forward the wisdom of integrated knowledge systems and combining it with the precision of modern science, creating new adaptive frameworks capable of navigating the complex challenges of our own climate crisis. The greatest gift our Younger Dryas ancestors may have left us isn't any specific technology or practice, but the demonstration of human adaptive capacity itself, the proof that when faced with existential threat, humans can not only survive but transform, developing new capabilities that redefine what's possible. In the face of our own climate crisis, this may be the most important discovery of all, that human adaptive capacity is not fixed but emergent, that crisis can catalyze capabilities that remain latent during stability, and that our potential to navigate environmental change may be far greater than we've assumed. The question is not whether we have the capacity to address our current climate challenges, but whether we can integrate our knowledge effectively enough to activate that capacity before it's too late, whether we can learn from our ancestors' response to their climate crisis in time to effectively address our own. As we complete our journey through the Younger Dryas mystery, we return to where we began, standing at the edge of a vast ice sheet, witnessing a world in the grip of catastrophic change. But now we see this moment differently, recognizing it not just as a crisis our ancestors endured, but as a catalyst that transformed them. In that transformation lies our inheritance, not just the physical technologies and practices that emerged, but the cognitive and social adaptations that made them possible. The capacity to think across multiple timescales, to integrate diverse knowledge domains, to encode complex information in transmissible forms. These capabilities didn't disappear entirely when the Younger Dryas ended. They became the foundation of what we call civilization, though often in fragmented, specialized forms that lost the integrative power of the original systems. The seeds remained, even as the garden changed. And now, as we face our own climate crisis, these ancient adaptations take on renewed significance. In the fragments that survived, in indigenous knowledge systems, in archaeological anomalies, in myths and traditional practices, we may find critical guidance for navigating our uncertain future. This is not about romanticizing the past or rejecting modern science. It's about recognizing that the most effective response to systemic challenges may be integrated knowledge ecosystems that combine the precision of scientific analysis with the holistic frameworks our ancestors developed. The Younger Dryas wasn't just a climate event that humans survived. It was perhaps the most significant catalyst for human innovation in our species' history, a crisis that revealed capabilities we might never have developed in its absence. Our current climate crisis may hold the same potential, not just as a threat to be feared, but as a catalyst that could inspire new forms of human cooperation, new integrative knowledge systems, new ways of relating to our planet and each other. The choice is ours. We can continue with fragmented approaches that address symptoms rather than systems, or we can learn from our ancestors, developing integrated responses that draw on both ancient wisdom and modern science. The question isn't whether we have the capacity, but whether we have the wisdom to use it. As you drift toward sleep tonight, perhaps you'll dream of those ancient innovators, the knowledge keepers who preserved wisdom through the Younger Dryas darkness. Their legacy lives not just in artifacts and genes, but in the fundamental human capacity to transform crisis into catalyst, challenge into change. Join us next time as we continue exploring the hidden chapters of human history, the stories that connect our past to our possible futures.